Good day, gentlemen. Dirk here with a bit of my own psychobabble on the MGTOW solution. Before I get into that, let me thank you guys for your continued support and all the great comments. There's been some good discussion here, and that's what I was hoping for when I started this project. So thanks for that. I've always been fascinated with the way the human mind works, so by the time I started taking college courses, I found classes in psychology pretty interesting. Not enough to pursue that as a career, but enough to take several psych classes. One of those was titled Theories of Personality, and we were required to develop our own individual ideas on the topic for a paper. This was a fairly easy assignment for me because I had previously given this kind of thing some thought, but clarifying those vague concepts for a paper helped me better understand how I personally view the world. In hindsight, some of my ideas overlapped with other work, and since then, some things have come up that first occurred to me way back then. After all, this was over 20 years ago. Now, there's no shortage of theories to explain human behavior. Some of it's legit, or at least thought-provoking, and some of it's pop psychology bullshit, at least in my opinion. And that's the thing about the field of psychology. It's almost entirely theoretical. You can't prove it. It's mostly soft science. That said, I still find the topic of human behavior interesting, and getting more involved with red pill philosophy got me thinking about the subject again. After all, we spend a lot of time talking about it. So this video's gonna basically be me reviewing that old concept, which I developed before taking the red pill, to see how it holds up now that I've taken it. The paper was titled 6 Aspects of Human Motivation, which I broke down as the following basic human needs: physical, intellectual, spiritual, emotional, creative, and release. If you know anything at all about the subject, then a couple of those probably jumped out as being part of Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And you're correct, specifically physical and emotional needs. But I didn't visualize the 6 aspects as a hierarchy. The model I used was actually a pie chart, divided into 6 sections. The idea was that different people have different priorities in their lives, but that we share basic needs, at least to some extent. So when you visualize the model, those 6 pieces of the pie chart aren't equal in the case of a real person. The distribution varies according to the individual's personality. I'll provide some examples in a minute, but first let's take a look at what I was talking about with each of the 6 aspects I presented. Physical needs include just what you'd expect, things like food, clothing, and shelter. And we all spend a certain amount of time and effort ensuring that we have these things in adequate supply. In red pill lingo, we're obviously talking about resources. But I also included physical activity in this category because I believe that people are evolved to require a certain level of physical activity, and when we don't get it, the imbalance causes health problems. That, in turn, could actually affect your survival. For example, if your survival need for food consists of being a glutton and getting 0 physical activity, then your physical needs aren't actually being met, even though you have enough food to survive. In this case, more than enough. And you'll probably end up with diabetes or heart disease or something. The idea is that you have to maintain some semblance of balance. Intellectual pursuits are the things that separate humans from other animals. Human beings in modern society are required to gain a significant amount of knowledge just to survive, and many people take this to the limits of what the human brain is capable of. So we have scientists and other intellectuals whose lives are devoted in large part to the pursuit of knowledge. Most of us don't take it that far, but there's no questioning the value of continued learning and intellectual pursuits, such as studying human nature. Spiritual aspects of life clearly vary greatly with the individual, and I may be wrong on this, but I think we all have a spiritual component to our personalities, even if it's small. And again, since we're dealing with human behavior, nobody can prove me wrong any more than I can prove I'm right. It's all theoretical. The creative drive also differs among individuals, but I believe then, and I believe now that we all have at least some desire to express our creativity. And it doesn't have to be some kind of art. A lot of people express their creativity through their work, and when they do, they usually find the work more rewarding. Emotional needs are pretty self-explanatory. For most people, this includes at least some level of human interaction. We all know people who seem to have a need to constantly be around other people and are actually uncomfortable when they're not, and other people who value their solitude. Most are somewhere in the middle. At any rate, emotional health is tied in with everything else. All 6 of these aspects are interdependent, and there's more to it than interpersonal relations. A lot of it just comes down to attitude and the person's general outlook on life. Release needs would include things like sleep or just kicking back. It's what you're doing when you grab a beer, watch a movie, take a nap, or go on a vacation. Basically, it's taking a break from the other 5 things, all of which require some amount of energy. In other words, release from the demands of life in order to recover. Okay, so we have these 6 aspects on a pie chart. In a perfect distribution, each of them would represent 16.6%. I remember making the point that this wasn't necessarily the amount of time that you devote to each of these things. If that were the case, then sleep alone would make up 33%. Rather, the concept was to think of these in terms of their relative importance to you, in your own mind, and in accordance with your own values. And when visualized as a pie chart, you can see how increases in one area would require decreases in another. So if you're an athlete, the physical piece might be larger than the spiritual piece. Or if you're a total egghead, maybe the intellectual piece is huge and everything else is relatively small. One thing displaces others. You only have so much physical and psychic energy to go around, so something has to give. Everyone's distribution would look somewhat different, and this isn't good or bad, it's just that people are unique. That's what personalities are. I'm not suggesting that anyone should strive for a perfect balance, because we're all infinitely variable individuals with different priorities. Having said that, you can see where problems might arise if things are taken to extremes and get severely out of balance. A few examples. Excessive release needs could result in substance abuse as a way to escape reality. Obsessive exercise in a physical dominant personality could result in overtraining or injury. A sedentary life in academia as an intellectual dominant could lead to health problems from neglecting physical or emotional needs. So, my basic idea with this was that there will always be variability, but that all 6 aspects must be present to some extent in a healthy human being. I mean, even the dumbest motherfucker on earth has some intellectual capacity, even if it isn't very much. Personally, I have a general idea of what my distribution looks like. I'm physical and creative dominant. I like to work out, play guitars, and make MGTOW videos. My spiritual aspect isn't as high as my intellectual one, but it's definitely there. I know that I struggle with release aspects because I don't always sleep well. And my emotional needs are met through friendships, but are also tied in with my physical health and in some cases, my work. In my case, I'm fairly low maintenance in the emotions department. Your mileage may vary, but I'd bet that you could apply this model to yourself. You know yourself better than anyone, and things that are important to me might not be important to you, and vice versa. A lot of conflict arises when people try to force their personal beliefs and priorities onto other people. It's one thing to have a discussion or provide an opinion, another to shove your values down someone else's throat and insist they adapt to your way of thinking. For example, I've suggested before that maybe people should try getting at least a little exercise, but you're free to say, "Fuck that, Dirk. I hate working out." Fine, it's just a suggestion, like not getting married. But we do have people with severely imbalanced personalities insisting that we adjust our priorities in order to accommodate them. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, hey, I wonder what it would look like for an entitled female. I think you'd see a physical and emotional dominant personality with those two things crowding out everything else. The pieces of the pie chart for creative, intellectual, spiritual, and possibly even release needs would be quite small. Remember, survival needs are included under the physical aspect, and because survival needs are all about resources, this piece of the pie would be enormous in the case of a materialistic female. Females are also generally emotional dominant and sometimes take this to the limit. In fact, many women's lives seem to revolve entirely around those two things: resource acquisition and feelings. Creative women? Maybe in some cases. Intellectual? Not so much. Am I wrong on this? Generally speaking, I'd guess that men are simply more balanced than women, at least according to this construct. Of course, there's going to be exceptions, but is anyone going to honestly argue that women aren't often overly emotional or obsessed with acquiring resources well in excess of those required for survival? Or that men don't usually have better control of their emotions or aren't more intellectually inclined? These are actually frequent topics of discussion in the red pill community. Men excel in STEM fields and built modern civilization, and this demonstrates our intellectual capacity. Men have always been the vast majority of engineers, composers, and artists, demonstrating our competence in creative pursuits. Most spiritual leaders have been men, and in sports, men excel to such a degree that men and women don't even compete with each other. That leaves physical, survival, and emotional aspects, which are every bit as important as the other things in motivating people, but there are significant differences in how men and women go about fulfilling these two needs. For the physical stuff, namely survival needs, men look to themselves. They know that nobody's going to take care of them, unless maybe they're gender fluid, liberal, communist, feminist, social justice warriors raised by single moms. Women generally look to men to fulfill these needs, which is why they start dreaming about their weddings before they even reach puberty. As for emotions, men do look to women for emotional validation, which explains all the white knighting and vagina worship, though a lot of that is purely sexual. To state the obvious, MGTOW have moved past this need for female validation, but blue pill simps devote their lives to seeking approval from women. Women, by contrast, are so emotionally demanding that terms like needy, clingy, high maintenance, controlling, jealous, and dependent are associated almost exclusively with the female gender. So it's not enough for a man to tend to a woman's physical needs and provide her with material goods. He also must tend to her emotional needs. This wouldn't be a problem if things were kept to a manageable level, but here's the common scenario that often fucks things up and ends relationships. The woman demands that more resources will be required to make her happy, so the man works longer hours. The woman feels emotionally neglected because the man is so busy working to satisfy her physical needs that there's not enough time to take care of her emotional needs. So she feels neglected and starts complaining, "All you do is work." This is usually the beginning of the end of that relationship, and it stems from the fact that the woman's personality is out of balance. And in many cases, rather than looking to herself to fulfill her needs, she'll look to her man. This basically translates into, if she's not happy, it's his fault. Meanwhile, the man has physical and emotional needs too, like intimacy, sex, and moral support. These needs are usually met early in a relationship, but slowly fade away as the woman begins to view him as a disposable utility. Then again, I've seen it happen very quickly after marriage. A clear example that the woman was in it strictly for resources. It wasn't always this way, but now women are well aware that all they have to do is say the magic words, "I'm not happy," and they can collect their cash and prizes and move on to the next guy. And they exercise this option every day. This leaves a lot of men exhausted after years or decades of dedicated effort, wondering how all his hard work could go so unappreciated. It goes unappreciated because the woman involved was obsessed with her material and emotional needs at the expense of everything else. Her 6 aspects were out of balance. In other words, it happened because hypergamy. Getting back to my personality theory, it's just one way of looking at things that might prove useful to a man going his own way. And like most things in life, it isn't static. If you're in college, for example, that intellectual aspect will probably be more dominant than it is at other points in your life. Same for all the other aspects. People change. In my mind, one of the great things about the MGTOW community is that it's getting a lot of men to dive into topics like psychology, philosophy, and spirituality. Most guys don't give those things a lot of thought, in large part because they don't have the time. But consider this question. Who's going to be the more evolved human being? The man who has spent the last 20 years engaged in self-development, like we're doing here? Or the man who spent the last 20 years trying to meet the unrealistic demands of some screeching harpy? There are a lot of personality assessments out there, Myers-Briggs, MMPI, and countless others. I've taken quite a few of them, some excellent, some downright stupid. The good ones are far more scientific than my little undergrad project presented here, and they're worth taking if for no other reason than the entertainment value. If you pick up a little self-knowledge along the way, so much the better. The key point from my 6 aspects was that it's important to keep your life in balance. I've found that to be infinitely easier since going my own way. Anyway, just something I came up with back in the day. Take it or leave it, as always. Thanks for listening, guys. Hit subscribe and click the bell on your way out if you haven't already, and give all MGTOW videos a thumbs up. This helps get the word out. Have a great day.